So I'm talking about the Belanger Park field trip planning guide that I've been working on for the last year and a half. And so when we're thinking about planning a field trip for middle school and high school students, we might think about maybe a museum, a historical site, an outdoor adventure park, or something like that. But a place like Belanger Park in River Rouge might not be the first thing that comes to mind. This is a picture of Belanger Park back in November when I visited last November. Um, and it's an ordinary park. It has a power plant on one side and a steel mill on the other, and it's right on the Detroit River. It has close proximity to a lot of really interesting and important sites of human and environmental history. It actually makes it an excellent site for a field trip location. So for the last year, I've been working on this field trip guide with the goal of helping educators plan a place-based field trip to this park for their students. So just to go over the agenda briefly, I'm going to introduce you to Belanger Park, talk a little bit about place-based learning, and then tell you a little bit more about the project. Then we're going to do about a 10-minute preview of the finished guide. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some takeaways and lesson learned, challenges that we faced, and then what's next. So, where is Belanger Park? If you are not familiar with the area, it is in River Rouge. It is in the middle of their very highly industrialized waterfront. It is right at the intersection of the Detroit and Rouge rivers. So that also makes it close to the major industrial site, Zug Island, if you know where that is. So, why Bellinger Park? Like I said, it is right next to Zug Island. Here's kind of a bird's eye view. You can see all of the industry around it. It is also near some, it is the location of where there used to be indigenous burial mounds. Most of them, all but one, have been destroyed. It's also right down the road from historic Fort Wayne and is close to some historic colonial settlements. It is also interesting to recent history. If within the last few years, the EPA did a very large soil removal project. So they found that it had high amounts of lead in the soil, and they removed the soil and replaced it with uncontaminated soil. And it was closed to the pub. Most of it was closed to the public for about a year. And then finally, it's one of the few riverfront accesses in the area, and it has a very large green space. Basically, exploring the park can help students understand how humans inhabited the land and altered the environment before and after European settlement. Which brings me to place-based learning. So this is a preview of the heritage resource map that the Story Lab also produced in a different project. It is one of the resources that we have included in the field trip guide. And basically, what it shows us is how many heritage resources, how many resources that can teach us about the human heritage of the area exist and can be learning resources for students. So this project specifically is an experiment with hyperlocal placemaking. So we ask, what happens when we build a field trip guide around an ordinary place on the Detroit River? And can places like these result in a valuable learning experience? We're trying to tap into the stories of the people and creatures that call this place home. So I joined this project in the third stage on here, the field trip guide. But one thing that I really want to highlight is that we've worked really hard to engage with educators throughout the entire process of developing this project. So uh, the project was designed in conversation with Detroit Public School admin, who shared that they were launching an initiative uh, meant to bring place-based learning into opportunities, place-based opportunities into courses across the curriculum. And they shared that that was a district-wide interest. And so in 2024, two U of M students worked with the Detroit River Story Lab to develop a lesson plan that was meant to do this. They interviewed and consulted with teachers, and then they consulted with Darren Stockdill, who is an instructional design expert at U of M, and is here today. So thank you, Darren, for joining us. I also had the opportunity to consult with Darren on the field trip guide, and it was a very, very helpful experience. The other exciting thing that I got to do as part of this project was attend the educator night at the Detroit Cultural Center. And I got to speak with teachers there who were just looking at the different resources that different organizations had to offer. And I was able to share the sample of the guide with them and just kind of talk about what they're interested in, what if this resource is something that they would like to try out, and kind of just some first thoughts about it. So now I want to kind of do a little brief introduction to the project before diving into the actual preview, just so that we kind of know what we're getting into. This is a fully customizable uh, guide that so we took the lesson plan that was developed in 2024 and gathered all of the resources that we thought um, would be useful and necessary in executing that guide and executing the lesson plan so that teachers would have the least amount of extra work needed to execute it. So how can we make this lesson plan fully executable with the least amount of work possible? So but the cool thing is it's customizable, but it's also ready to go. So you don't have to make any changes to it if you don't want to. The opportunity is there. So the lesson plan consists of a pre-visit lesson, which is a 50-minute classroom lesson, is mostly history of the region. Then the field trip visit is a four-station kind of activity at Belanger Park. And then there's a post-visit lesson, which is a debate activity. And then finally, we have a fourth chapter, which is the lesson planning resources. Basically, we took anything that wasn't absolutely essential to the lesson plan and put it into its own chapter so that you could quickly scroll through or flip through the different activity packs, read about the activities, figure out how to do them. And if there's additional information you feel that you need, you can go to that last chapter. So, can you see the guide? Great. Okay. So, this is the planning guide. As you can see, it's 45 pages. Um, we have some useful information in the beginning about Belanger Park, but what is really useful is, and we went through a few iterations of how to structure this, but what we landed on was the sections for each lesson, and then there's activity packs for each activity underneath that. So this is the pre-visit lesson. And if you were to take this guide and seek to create a lesson out of it, you'll find that there's an overview, there's suggested time. So for each section, it'll tell you how much time that this should take, the different materials that you have to prepare. So for the first lesson, it's a 10-minute slide presentation, and discussion questions for each 20-minute reflection, and there's two of those. And then there's a description of the activities. Then you go into the activity packs. There are 2 pages each, or 3, depending. And this will tell you again the estimated time, a narrative on what you have to do to prepare for it. We also prepared some useful vocabulary that I think is good for both teachers and students, because I did not know what a lacustrine plane was when I started this either. And for this activity, because it's a 10-minute presentation, what I did was I prepared a basically 3-paragraph background information of any of the information that you might want to cover in the presentation. So instead of having to look at a bunch of the different links that we have, you could also just look at this paragraph and know that that is generally what is expected, what we imagined you would be teaching. And then a materials list, and then reflection questions. And we use these emojis, so you have, these are just basic reflection questions, but throughout the guide, you might see this light bulb emoji, and it's just different ideas of like alternative activities. So if you were to want to do something instead of the discussion, you could have students do a writing activity. And so that's kind of what I mean when I say it's customizable, but you don't have to customize it. That's an example where it's optional. And then resource previews. So we wanted people to be able to actually see the resources instead of having to click on them to view them. So each activity has resource previews of the resources that we collected. And then the field visit activity pack is pretty similar. It has the overview, the suggested time. This one's 90 minutes, so each uh, activity, each station is 20 minutes long. And we list more preparation. This one, um, there's more preparation for this one because there is an activity where students lower a disc into the water to test water quality. So this is kind of like a just a note that you're going to have to do that. For the information on how to do that, you just go to the actual SecuDisc activity. There's a summary of activities, basic lesson resources, a brief list, and some information about the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which I did not know that the Edmund Fitzgerald was actually launched from River Rouge. So I wanted to call attention to that because I think it's an interesting thing that you could bring into the lesson. So I'll just go over the first station. I'm not going to go over all of them. They're pretty straightforward. This preparation, vocabulary is all the same. The materials is pretty much the same. These are things like slides, Google document with full text of the activities if you want to print it out. And then this is kind of where it's different. The stations, a lot of them have more of an interactive component where there's kind of almost a script where there's information that you present to the students and then ask them questions about it. So I have the script written out here. Um, and then for the interactive presentation, it's similar. It's just a narrative of information from the lesson plan that can be kind of converted into a script, however you see fit. Um, and then the reflection questions and resource previews. Some of these, and it's noted in the document, we recommend that teachers print out and bring to the field trip so that you have something to show during this station. So this is useful if you're trying to pick out which one. Okay. And then the post-debate activity is a little different. So it's not split up into an activity pack. It's just all in the main section because there's just not that much that is needed to prepare for it. So we have a suggestion for how the debate should be separated. Preparation, straightforward. For the materials, we have handouts for different groups. So it's this is information that they might need to construct their arguments. And then we have a remediation method handout. Without going into too much detail, this is a printable version of information that I think is just easier to hand the student so they have access to it while they're presenting their arguments. So anything that you need to print out is right here. And then these are just pictures from the soil removal. And then, is that here? Yeah. So the lesson planning resources section is a little different. There's it we start with just kind of a general resource section for information about Belanger Park, River Rouge, things that you should know if you're going to be going there. And then there's a section for resources related to each activity, and that's separated into each activity so it's easily like findable. And then we have a third chapter, which I'll show you, that is separated by topic. So this is things like biodiversity and habitats. If you are a teacher who's interested in integrating more of that into your lesson plan than is originally listed, there's resources there that you can use to do that. So the other thing that we did, there are so many resources with amazing pictures and illustrations, and it's um, some that we felt like I felt like could kind of go into a few different sections. So if it has this picture frame emoji, I put that in there to indicate that it's a resource with photos, so that even if you're not specifically looking for information from that section, you can still see that there is a useful resource in there for you to click on. So here are the planning essentials for the lessons and activities. And then the expanded topics. So you can see biodiversity and habitats, current threats and ongoing conservation efforts, indigenous peoples of the Detroit River, and cultural values, environmental outcomes, and public health and environmental justice. This is just kind of the sections that arose out of the extra resources that I had. So I found that there were so many resources that were useful but weren't essential for specific lessons, that were more of, uh, if you want to know more about this and you want to read more than a 5-page summary, this is where you would go to find it. And yeah, uh, so that is the guide. Switch back to my slides. Okay, can we see that? Great. All right, so I'm going to talk about my takeaways, lesson learned. The first thing that I will say is that visiting the park before I started was one of the best things that I did. One of the most useful things because I was able to get an idea of what the space was like and start thinking about how might this space be used for a field trip. I have experience, I can't remember if I mentioned it or not, with outdoor education. So I have some, uh, observations, but what I really tried to think about when I was there was looking at what kinds of birds, animals, fish, wildlife, plants are around the park, what's going on at the park, how are the people visiting the park using it, what are people doing? There were people at the boat docks, and what kind of monuments and signage are there? There were a lot of informational signs. And then what areas of the park made me curious? I'll say to elaborate on that, there were a few different like anchor uh, statues and other kind of shipbuilding related things, and that I it was very interesting, but they weren't labeled. So I that made me want to learn more about, why is this here at the park? Like, why is this park an important site for this? Um, and then how might a large group use this space? The second big takeaway I have is starting with the big picture. So the guide looks so different from where it started, and we went through a few different iterations of the outline and the layering structure that we chose, and um I found that that was one of the most important parts. It was very hard to move forward without that, without knowing how are we going to present this information. So it was really important to find the best way to organize the resources because there were so many resources. And ultimately, how we I think got to where we ended up is we asked, how will this be used and what's the best format for this use? So thinking about the end user, thinking about the teacher, the busy teacher who's handed this big guide, and you're supposed to be able to make a field trip out of this. So how do we make it not, overwhelming and cluttered? Uh, and then it was challenging because there's no standard way to deliver this kind of material. So I utilize a lot of different free resources from like PBS and others for inspiration. And then finally, consulting with the experts. So we talked about this. I talked about this earlier, but um, speaking with educators and Darren about instructional design, and how to make this uh, accessible was vital. So some of the questions that I asked or tried to center my questions around was what is the best way to organize and share resources? What's the best level of detail? And how can we make this usable for a busy educator? And one thing that I found interesting when I spoke to teachers at Teachers Night, or Educators Night, was that some of them expected it to be STEM focused. So they saw it and they would come up to me and they'd be like, "This looks great, but I don't teach science." Which kind of brings me to the challenges. And this is the anchor statue that I was talking about. Um, uh, Figuring out how to express to teachers that this is fully interdisciplinary and not being written off at face value. Um, that really, I guess, depends on how it's shared. But this is there are elements of science, but there's also elements of literature and English and social science and pretty much anything that you can think of. There is a way to integrate it into this lesson plan. So, um, you know, how do we tell teachers, you might be an English teacher, but you can do place-based learning too. Um, And then I talked a lot about this already, but it was challenging to determine the level of detail and figuring out how to balance the need for a ready-to-go resource and the desire to offer customization. And then finally, long-term resource organization is, I think, a continuing challenge. So URLs aren't static, and there's not an easy way around that, but um, figuring out how to future-proof this is an interesting challenge to me because as websites change and things get taken down, we want to make sure these resources are still accessible. Okay, and then finally, what's next? Um, I am working on a an addendum. So this is in addition to this guide, which is ready to be published online, is an additional chapter that, or an additional resource that kind of answers the question, what next? What else can I do? So if a teacher were to do this field trip and really like it, how can they extend that place-based learning beyond this lesson plan? Um, so that's on the horizon. Something else that we are doing is we're actively seeking feedback right now. We would love to work with some educators who are willing to pilot the field trip. So if you're interested, there is funding available for that. My email and David's email are at the end of this presentation, so definitely reach out to us if you know anybody who might be interested. And then finally, this is kind of a longer term thing, but thinking about how can we use this guide as a model for interpreting other small parks. It doesn't have to end at Belanger. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. What a treat to see after all of these months of solid effort, the pieces coming together in such a full-bodied and engaging way. I know that we'll have questions from the group that's here. I think I'd like to just start with one, just to kind of segue from your one of your final remarks there about the interdisciplinary scope of the guide. You had as one of your slides, I think, had the names of the four key stations. If you could go back to that and just give us, the 15-second overview of what each of those stations is basically about, so we have a clearer sense of what the subject matter scope is in terms of the actual core experience. That would be terrific.
Yes, absolutely. I have to move my little picture thing. Okay. Um, so in terms of subject matter, um, I'll talk also about the pre-lesson activity pack because that's like a pretty like information dense lesson. But the introduction to the Detroit River is about kind of the geology of the region and like how the Great Lakes formed and the glaciers receded, and just kind of some information about like river dynamics. So very this whole um, pack is very ecology heavy because then the second one is ecology and the environment, and the third one is the history of human environment interaction, which involves a discussion about the fur trade and the near extinction of beavers and the Industrial Revolution and pollution. All of that to set up for the stations, which the Great Mound is about the indigenous history of the region. So the burial mounds that were in the area before they were destroyed by European settlers. And that kind of segues into the second station, which is the next step in history of colonial settlement. So when European settlers entered the area and engaged in fur trade initially, and I believe that that section is mostly about the fur trade. And then station three is industrial activity. That's pretty straightforward. So that one is also a lot about environmental pollution and water quality. And uh, yeah, because that's the station where they test with the disc in the water. And then that leads into station four, which is called Stewardship Today and Beyond, and that is basically uh, they learn about the community organizations that are engaging with uh, different, I guess, stewardship projects in the area. So that would include river cleanups, but it's also environmental justice and different ways for them to get involved if they feel really excited or passionate about what they learned today.
Terrific. Thanks for that. I think one of my one of the aspects of your project that I find the most exciting is just the range of disciplines and academic subjects that can be addressed from the space of this single park. And I think the field trip, as you've imagined it here, is really a wonderful illustration of that kind of scope for place-based education. Let's open the floor now to folks who have been listening to your presentation, might have questions or feedback or thoughts to share. Holly.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Caitlin, for this excellent presentation. This is like so fascinating and I'm so intrigued. I guess my question is, and maybe I missed this, what grade level do you like foresee these lesson plans for? And I'm also wondering if they would be adaptable for like different grade levels than you're intending. I'm just interested if you could maybe speak more about that.
Yes, that's such a good question because it also calls back to the educators' night feedback that I got. This is for middle school and high school students. I think it's kind of geared towards high school, but it is definitely flexible in that way. I had a lot of people asking me about elementary level education. At educators' night, there were a lot of like pre-K through I don't know when middle school starts here, fifth grade maybe. And I think that if somebody was willing to put in the work of making it more friendly towards younger grades, that they could definitely. But it definitely would be work, and um, it's definitely not kind of meeting that out of the box goal that we had. I would personally love to see this, used in a broad range.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Uh, Amy, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Obviously, it's very apparent, Caitlin, all the work that you've put into this. So kudos to you. Couple things jump out at me right away, talking about how you struggled with not quite sure what audience, and that you do want to promote it cross-curricular, but yet sometimes it's hard for teachers to envision that. My recommendation would be to make a table, but also include standards, because so many teachers do have to demonstrate, particularly if they're going to be leaving school grounds, they have to demonstrate what Standards they will actually be hitting in order to actually get permission to leave the grounds. So you could make a table where it is the grades, the topics, what is literature, history, ecology, and then also standards. And then as the science nerd, I would also throw in the engineering and science practices because there's so much that you have in that space, particularly when I saw the binoculars there, that one little table could give teachers such a visual of how they might see or actually collaborate with maybe the English teacher or the science or history teacher. Obviously, the ecology really got me geeked because I too work on the Detroit River and thought about depending on, so getting a field trip. And I love it because I think there are some teachers on here know that it's difficult to get a bus, it's difficult to get permission. And then you try to line it up with what you're teaching in the classroom so that it fits, it nestles, that pre and post lesson actually support what you're already doing. What's really great about the Detroit River is it really is a four season. And whether you're talking about the migratory birds, what happens in the winter, I'm going to give a huge shout out to really, really lean into the Native American populations in your area, starting with a land acknowledgement, talking about what this space means to them, why we're here in the first place. I know you want to try to keep it short. And of course, my brain went, oh my gosh, this is like 6 weeks of material. So I also was wondering if you wanted to add an addendum where how could you do just one of these? Particularly if teachers aren't familiar with this. When you said Seki dish, I love the Seshi disc. But if you're not a science teacher, A, you wouldn't know what that is. And maybe you want to throw in magnet fishing. Everybody knows what a magnet is. It's really unique. You have about the human environmental interactions, just going to throw that out as a possible idea. And then leaning into the voice and choice of a student when you're doing project-based or place-based education, of giving the students a voice and a choice. Maybe at the end when you had that cool debate, which I highly recommend you invite community speakers into, whether it's the EPA, whether it's Native people working in that area, whether it's some of the people from that factory, to really lend some authentic credence to the whole place of and community part of it, but allowing them maybe to take one of the four. Let them choose which of the four are you really interested. Make a PSA, make a blog post. If you had to redo signage, you could also get art teachers in here. If you had to do a sign, a lot of historic signs, I hate to tell you, really long, really boring. Only nerds like me read them. But how would they design a sign to tell the story? Is it, is it an ecological story? Is it a historical story? Is it, I don't want to, I could go on and on because your project so excites me. You've done such an amazing job. There's so many elements. I see how you struggled with just keeping it to one size because I wrote down tons of notes I'm happy to send to you, but super excited for you. I'll stop there because I want to give others a chance to talk.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. I like the idea of the table, especially. It's yeah.
I think Edu, do I see your hand?
Yeah.
Are you still there, Edu?
Yeah, sorry.
There.
Okay. Oh, sir.
My connection is a little fuzzy, so yeah, I was just sharing that in terms of a test group that I'm a member of the collaborative Detroit Outdoors, and one of the things we do is work with high school teachers in Detroit and kind of the metro Detroit area and train them to take their high school students on overnight camping trips. And they're teachers from all different subject and content areas, from art to science, math, whatever. We've got a little bit of everybody in there. But they tend to be people who really lean toward place-based education models. And so they're like a nice little pool of people to throw this in to see what they think. And potentially there might be somebody in that group who, if they decided to guide one of their first camping trips at Fort Wayne, which we encourage them to do, they can just walk over to Belanger Park. It's right next door. So It could give them some built-in activities to do for their day 2 besides just cooking and cleaning up camp. So just wanted to throw that out there as a possibility. So love to talk with you more offline about how we actually could communicate with them.
You're muted.
I just said thank you, and you could go ahead.
No, no. Are you speaking to me, Barbara, or
Yes,
someone?
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
oh,
Yes.
no, no, that's okay. Well, I thought your presentation was very comprehensive. I really I learned a lot. And I was really attached to it, and it took me back to my years when I worked at Southwestern High School. um, because many of our students came from River Rouge and E-Course. At the time that high school was old, and some of the parents, they heard about Southwestern, which was old too, but they had very strong teachers there. And I don't know if you, but what's his name? Carson, who was on the cabinet. Southwestern was on the Trump's cabinet.
Ben Carson?
Ben Carson. Why couldn't I think of it? Yes, Ben Carson also attended that school and Southwestern, and visited frequently. He came to a lot of the presentations, to graduations, and then we had the number one basketball team with Perry Watson, and were winners consecutively. So, a lot of it was about the hype, but it did draw a lot of students from E-Course and River Rouge. So that's what I thought of. But most of all, because I love the river, and David knows that, and that's why I loved your reference to the river, and something I didn't know. I'm almost embarrassed to say I didn't know this. So of course I know the Detroit River, but I did not know that. Okay, and it does make sense that there is a Rouge River that flowed into it, and I'm wondering at if that was at the point where there's a bridge that the students had to cross. In other words, they could not even get to Southwestern High School if that bridge weren't there. And I was a counselor, and students were always telling me they were late because the bridge was up. And I knew what they were talking about, but I never saw that bridge. I never actually had driven there, and that would have been something I should have done to really, know what experience that they were having and how traumatic it was. Because even though I understood, a lot of the teachers did not. They still would. Uh, they would still be tardy, and if they had so many, then that of course went against them, against their time. So that was an eye opener for me to realize that what you were talking about, I think, is at that point where the two rivers converge, sort of, the Detroit River. And like I said, I never thought about that. But I can't say enough how traumatic that was. Every day during the week, someone would come saying I'm late because the bridge was up. So, yeah. Um, so that was something that I'm glad that you mentioned, that you emphasized that part of it about the river being right there. Seems like there's something else I was going to say as well. Um, yeah, like I said, I'm just, that school too had a very good reputation. And what I loved about it was the mix of the different ethnicities. Because we had students from around that Southwest Detroit, which is Hispanic, uh, some from Hungary, uh, those who were from the Muslim population, of course, African Americans, and we had a lot from where I go. Where were the mountains in Tennessee? And I used to say the name of all the time. It just wasn't prepared to say it now. So we had a mix of cultures, in which I loved about the school, and the students got along very well, and I think that's because we had good representation with a strong principal, strong teachers. Okay, I think I'm getting off of the of your subject, but it's got me excited to hear that, because I didn't know what your presentation, because whatever it was called, I didn't relate to it, and I probably should have done that before you
Well,
got
what you're reminding us of, Barb, is the importance of all sorts of stories and bringing these kinds of locations to life, right? I mean, your
yeah,
story of the bridge and the students being late
yeah,
because of the bridge is part of what a lot of people probably experienced in that neighborhood. And the whole
absolutely.
premise of these projects is to, try to figure out a way to make more of those stories more visible to more people. Going back to Aiden's comment, I was
Yes.
thinking that kind of joint field trip expedition could work out really nicely, given that Fort Wayne, as I remember, has a significant mound structure, right? And that could be that, since that's one of the topics of the field trip as it stands now, that could be a very productive pairing of visits.
Exactly, exactly. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And my heart is broken when they demolished Southwestern. I mean, a lot of us, it's just unbelievable. And I don't even know of the Gordie Howe Bridge, how that, if that was an area that plan that will be occupied, but I don't see it at this point. I can't see the necessity of them needing that space, and maybe that's something for later. And then the neighborhood, the how they destroyed that neighborhood, the Dell, Dell something. I used to say that all the time. Del Rey, yeah, took me a come back. That was such a close-knit neighborhood, and just historic, and that's all gone. I went through there and I just about cried, honestly.
So, um,
Can I jump in real quick?
yeah, please do, Dan.
Yeah, I'd just say great job, Caitlin. Thank you for sharing that. It's really fun to see the progress because I've gotten to see it kind of develop over time. So really, really, really top-notch work and very thoughtful analysis. And I'd just offer, if you want to have another chat about Amy's suggestions and about tying it to the content expectations, just shoot me an email. Happy to provide you some like a quick snapshot as to how to go about that if you're interested in that. Because I agree with Amy. I think that's super important, and that was a great suggestion. So just let me know if you want some help with that. But great work. Wonderful to see it take shape.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
More questions. We can wrap it up there. Let's give Caitlin a final round of applause. And
Yeah, yay.
many abundant thanks for all of the effort and the inspiration and resourcefulness that went into putting this resource together. I think there will be plenty of takers to the offer to put this to good work in the world, and hopefully we can continue revising it and adding some of these additional features that people have suggested. So thanks everyone for being here, and stay warm out there. See you on the river this summer.
Yeah, yeah.
Bye.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Great job, Caitlin. Yeah.
Thank you.